Well, gentlemen, how we doing? It's the holiday season, and it's the holiday season for 2022, which means Christmas, my birthday, New Year's. And I thought it'd be fun to do just a little segment with you guys doing a question and answer thing. I sat down the other day and I wrote down 10 of the top 10 questions that I get asked all the time. Like a lot. And I thought, well, this would make a good YouTube segment. Me personally, I don't find what I do over here all that overly interesting or entertaining, but a lot of you guys do. And so I thought, well, let's do a little question and answer time. And I'm not going to stand here and talk to you on the camera. That's boring. Bad video. The fact that I know the difference between good and bad video has nothing to do with repairing the equipment. But it does take up a large portion of my time, which we'll get to. But we're going to get to that. The first question that I get asked all the time is, how did I get my start? And I don't really know what sometimes you guys mean by that, but I got started with radio when I was, 4 or 5. And I was in Oklahoma, and my grandpa had a CB radio, and he had CB radios in all his cars, and we'd go drive someplace, and half the family would be in one big giant Lincoln, and the other half would be in the other, and we'd be talking back and forth as we were going down the road. And I thought it was magical. And that sparked a little spurt of energy in my life about radio, wanting to know more about it and understanding how it worked. Now, fast forward a little bit to when I was like 17 or 18, 16, 15, somewhere in there. When stuff would break, there used to be this thing called a repair shop that you could take your stuff to get fixed. With the birth of the cell phone, if it breaks, for the most part, people just throw it away. There are cell phone repair centers that are around today, but it's... Come on, my demographic here is, age 40 to about 80, according to the statistics on YouTube. We all know, we all remember, you had a right to repair because electronics were repairable things, right? Well, there was no one around that would work on amplifiers. And so I wanted to learn more about it. And the fact that you put a little bit of RF in one end and more came out the other was just, and I wanted to know more about it. And that has turned into a lifelong obsession. So, in the short, that's how it worked. I mean, when I was older, I got to go work at a CB shop here in town, kind of got the ins and outs of how that whole industry goes down and works. That's also yet another thing that's gone the way of the dodo bird. It used to be every major town you would come to, there was a CB shop, or there was a truck stop with some kind of... It's all gone. It's all gone now, but... I mean, what I get to do, I consider is legacy at this point. I can see it. I see the writing on the wall, and I love it. And I'm going to try my damnedest to be the last one with this porch light on, trying to help people with radio. I'm just going to try. I get that question all the time. How did you start? The other question I get a lot, well, I'm jumping off script. Let's move on to some other stuff, and we'll keep going. Hold on a sec. Look at this. My wife's making these today for all the neighbors. It's a little piece of pretzel with a Hershey's hug and a little M&M on top. She brought this out. She goes, here. I'm like, aw, thank you. Okay. The next major question I get asked is, man, I love watching your YouTube videos. They're way better than everybody else that we watch. Okay, if you say so. Let me help you understand. I do not, nor do I plan on in the future ever really spending that much time watching other YouTube channels about this same topic that I do. I don't. And the diversity of what I do over here is changed a lot. In the beginning, my very first YouTube video was shot on this camera right here. It's a Samsung S3. This is the OG of OG original pieces of equipment. That thing right there. And it was shot with a freaking dozy watt meter and 1,000-watt oil can dummy load that I bought from, I think, Reds or so. I bought it off eBay back when eBay was in its infancy. I come from a world that predates Facebook and predates a large portion of the internet that we take for granted today. And as we've gone forward, it has allowed me to grow as my understanding of how the internet works. And now we feed the almighty algorithm. Okay. As we go forward, my knowledge has grown, my base of my channel has grown, and the things I do at this channel, it's not just simply fix radios or fix amplifiers. It's talk about multiple topics, and also now with the spoken word thing, get people's personal history. We're going to get around to that. That's going to take up a large portion of this next year, believe it or not. I get asked, well, what do you shoot your videos on? I started out on this little phone, and the whole point behind shooting with that little phone was that nobody knew who I was. All right? Today, I get to enjoy the pros and the cons of everybody and their brother knowing who I am, right? Okay? If I say it works a certain way, because there's so much evidence that me saying that this is the way it is, that carries weight. In the beginning, when I didn't know anything, and I still don't know anything today, and I'll be the first one to tell you that, okay? You don't get to walk around acting like you know everything, because you don't. No one does. In the beginning, when I was still learning, if I said something worked the way it did, there was that open window of questionability. Well, dude, how does this guy in Idaho know anything about anything about anything? Fairly valid point. Nobody had come out of Idaho that worked on anything, for the most part, like on the bigger stage that we're all playing to. Does that make sense? So I thought, well, I'm just going to video the thing working. That way when they get it on their end and they blow it up. But see, right out the hop, I got mixed in with some really bad characters. A couple bad seeds. And the only reason they were doing business with me is because they wanted to see me fail. And so they would send me pieces of equipment. I'd repair them, they'd blow them up, then they'd get on the internet and bash me and say, oh, well, he bought a 2-pill from me and it blew up immediately. I didn't have any evidence to back up where I was coming from, which is, no, the guy sent me a couple $100. I built him a piece of equipment. It ran great here. I sent it to him. He put it in his, we'll just say Jeep, and he ran it on 24 volts and blew it up. We're talking a 12-volt device. So now at some point or another, you got to be able to stand up for yourself and say, hey, that's not cool. That's a lie. And here's the evidence why. So here's the piece of equipment. Here's the meters. Here's the voltage that we're on. Debate it. What did you do to it on your end? That was the whole point behind the channel. Well, very quickly after that, I upgraded to the Note 4. And then not too long after that, LG V20. But about in here is where I started taking the YouTube channel seriously and start looking at different ways to capture video. Now, with the radio obsession, in the background, when I wasn't wanting to play with radio, I always thought the audio-visual side of how things went on, either it be in my church or at a concert or anything. That's back when I used to go to church when I was a kid. I always thought the electronics that made sound and the production of a show go on was way more entertaining than whatever show I ever went to. I was like, oh man, I'm at a concert. And I'd be back over hanging out by the front of house guys, trying to figure out what the hell they were doing, because it was way more interesting to me. So getting involved in that allowed me to start playing with cameras and video. And so that's also been a large portion of my life going forward. But I say there was probably 700-800 plus videos shot on this Sony 4K little handheld camera, the Handycam, on a 20.6 megapixel. This is probably 7, 8 years old at this point, which is dinosaur technology. But it still shoots 20 megapixel 4K video, which is not too far from even the highest standard that we have today for most of the capture stuff. Yeah, there's 6 and there's 8K and blah, 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 blah. You gotta remember, we're feeding primarily a 4K platform, and YouTube has made it very clear that until people can stream 6 or 8K, they are not changing their standard. Well, I can remember when 1080p was the highest resolution that you could get on YouTube. And so from this camera forward, everything has been shot. This was a 1080p platform, and then I immediately went to 4K as quickly as I could. And in the back end, figured out how to render the 4K video. I got really depressed when I used to watch other people's YouTube videos way back when, because it was, they're rough, they're raw, they're really hard to follow. The people that are speaking in the videos, they don't want to take the time to articulate very clearly what they're actually pointing at. There's very little accountability. Like, there's several guys out there that have a wood board with a bunch of bird meters on it with blue painter's tape over the meters, and they'll quickly move their camera around. Well, here's this line section, and they'll quickly show you the slug, but they don't really hold on the slug long enough for it to focus, and it's rough. It's just rough. So I wanted to do something more smoothly. So now we start with video editing software and buying computers specifically dedicated to doing editing of videos. Okay, on and on and on and on and on. The only reason that this phone is out here is because I've used it in about 5 different videos. Everything else was primarily shot on this little Sony 4K Handycam. So now, let me switch platforms one more time. Same topic, let me switch platforms. All right. So now we're on the newest, latest addition to the staple. Now we're shooting in 4K, but a really, really different frame rate. A little bit more information with this camera. So the next thing that my business partner at the time, my friend, Mr. Black, who's now gone on to God, he says to me, "Brother, I want to do whatever I can to help you blow up." I said, "Okay. What we really need to do is buy a real camera." Because I was primarily working on that camera right there. And he says to me, "Well, what is that going to take?" And I said, "A lot of big boy money." And he goes, "Well, what's a lot of big boy money?" And you guys don't know, my friend Mr. Black, Mr. Frank, he wanted to do everything he possibly could to blow this channel up. And in my mind, the only way we make things better is we buy better equipment. Better equipment to either document what we're working on, working with, or testing to, okay? It's like I bought all of this stuff. All of this stuff that we see, none of this was free that we see on camera. Everything here, you know, I jokingly say wink, wink, nod, nod. I say thank you to Siglent, and I say thank you to MechMan, and I say thank you to Excess Power and Bird and Coaxial Dynamics. At the end of the day, nobody owns me, and no one will ever own me when it comes to sponsorship. When people come talk to me about sponsorship, I tell them, great, well, I live in a realistic world, and I understand that things cost money, and I don't want anything for free. What I do want to do is I want to help support what you're doing because I believe your product is good. So if you'll sell it to me at an incredibly discounted rate, I'll take you on as a, you know, as a sponsor. Now, that's not the way 99.99999% of the YouTube channels that you watch work. Hence the reason you see them shilling themselves for, you know, that whole lords thing. Oh yeah, come buy 1 square foot of Scotland and you'll become a lord. No, that's all a scam. I don't want to be associated with that kind of stuff. That's not how success really works. Big success. That's what they call temporary success. It's needless to say, we entered into an agreement where he'd help me out and in turn I'd help him out. And it worked out great. So I called him my business partner. He's really just my friend. He did have a vested interest in this place, but I ended up buying him out of that, and yeah. So The next major thing that we went out and purchased was this. This is a Sony FS5. And when I purchased this thing, it was already multiple years out of date. And they had just released the FF6. Now they're on to the FS7. So this is a relatively old camera, but it's still in 4K, and it shoots at a fairly high megapixel rate. Okay, it's still 35 millimeter crop. And what we're wanting to get away from that now is go to full frame. It did not have any of this fancy stuff that's attached to it now. When I bought it, it was just the body only with the handle and then the shoe. I've had to go and add the extra viewfinder, make it easier for me to do faster video productions. I've upgraded the lens probably 5 or 6 times. You guys have never noticed or said anything. Battery life has gone way up. The quality of the video cards has gone way up. And the thing that I'm capturing my audio with, this Sony lapel system used to be the top of the notch, top of the notch, top of the line system. The fun part about this Sony wireless lapel thing is that I can take the receiver for this lapel and plug it into that camera, or plug it into this shoe, or the camera that I'm shooting on right now, plug it into that shoe. And guess what? It just clicks in. So I like Sony. All the Sony stuff is usually legacy reverse supported. That one microphone package system works with almost every Sony camera platform I've come across. Now my buddy, old Prime over there in the Northwest, he is also a Sony fan. I need to get in this backpack here. He is also a Sony fan himself. And so I get to go over there and go play with all the new cool stuff that he buys all the time. Because let's face it, that man's in a whole different bracket of money than you or me combined. And I saw this system and fell in love with it. So I thought, well, it's time to start moving forward. I shot all the spoken word videos on this system. Now, the lapel system's getting ready to change. I'm probably going to go to the DJI system. It's pretty idiot free, and I've got to be able to mic more than one person. So I thought, this camera is huge and it weighs a ton, and I can break it down into a small bag, but as far as trying to check it as a carry-on, because now I'm going to have to fly and rent a car, because I've gotten most of the people over here in the Northwest that are willing to sit down on video. I think I need to start making this whole setup a little bit smaller. So I start playing around with other cameras. This is about, a year ago. Once again, not being able to sink a ton of money into this, I went out, and this is a Sony Alpha 6300 is what I bought. And it shoots stupid beautiful video. Once again, it's not full frame. We're going after full frame. And I mean, seriously, great video. And it's really small. The battery life for that is for shit. It's horrible. The battery life on this is just horrible. It's click, 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 5-10 minutes of video. Even with the updated grip, the camera is actually this part up. It's a great little lens for this camera. It's a 3.5 f-stop down to 5.6, so when you go to 135 millimeters, your light going into the aperture goes way down. That's a lot of things that you got to learn to be able to shoot off of a cell phone. And a lot of people don't want to do that for the YouTube video. They just don't. So let's go ahead and let's jump over to the other camera. I'm going to put this one back up in here. And honestly, this camera is so easy to use for shooting videos, because there's some functions that are built into this that make it a lot more ergonomic for a cinematographer versus a photographer. This is a photography camera that you can use to shoot video. This is a video camera that if you wanted to stop the video and take single frames, you could use it to take pictures. Big difference. Big difference. Okay, let's switch back over here real quick. So, needless to say, the Patreons are the ones that make these things kind of upgrades possible. So where we're heading to in the future are these guys. We're going to go over here. I got like 3 more pieces of glass that are actually supposed to be here today for this new system. This is the Sony AR4. And this is what we're going to start doing a majority of our video on, is going to be this camera. I did buy this lens to do a little bit of sport. Look, I like to take pictures of my kid riding her horse and my wife riding her horse. And I don't know, there's something about I want to catch that magical moment. And I think it goes back to the very first video, or very first movie that was ever shot, which I think was of a black gentleman riding a horse. And there's a couple frames in there where all 4 of the feet of the horse are off the ground. The horse is in a really good lope. And I want to catch that. I want to catch that in today's modern equivalent with people I know in it. And I'll get there. But back to topic at hand. This camera shoots great video. This camera shoots great video. This camera shoots really good video. But the one that we're watching here is geared specifically towards what we do with it. You'll find that most YouTubers use a little tiny camera like this with a fairly decent lens on it, something like that. And they sit there and they talk to it just like I do. It's great. But at the long and the short, you got to keep upgrading because you get left behind. This is a 7 or 8 year old camera. This is a 3 or 4 year old camera. This one here is 2 generations back and probably 7 or 8 year old camera as well. I don't know about you. I'm not made completely of money. And it is almost impossible to buy the newest and latest, greatest camera, especially taking into account when they come out, they're $5,000, $10,000. And then you got to buy all the shit that goes with them. This new software upgrades every time, this new cables that goes with them every time, usually a couple new tripods, new batteries, new. So, what do I shoot my video on? Now you guys know. And there's a reason that I'm upgrading. I've kind of alluded to it, but we'll come back to that here in a minute. Okay. Question number 8 that I get quite often is, why am I so hard to get a hold of on the phone? Well, first off, I've got my number plastered in every single YouTube video. So you would be surprised the phone calls that I get. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. If you have a question, and I've said this for years and years and years, the only dumb question is the one that you don't ask. Okay? Call me. Got a question? Call me. That's what I'm here for. But I learned from my friends that owned Burkhart. I called over to Burkhart one time and I said, man, you guys are sure hard to get a hold of. And I didn't know at the time he was getting ready to sell or do whatever he was going to do. And he just starts laughing. He goes, young man, he goes, how old are you? And I told him, I said, at the time I was like 42, right? He goes, young man, listen, I have been in the radio business and it was like 40 years at that point, about as long as I've been alive, okay? And he goes, I look at the phone as a convenience tool for me, not as a convenience tool for everybody else. And what he was trying to share with me is that he answers the phone at his leisure. And especially with the modern onset of technology, we have this thing called call ID and call history, and everything is logged, and everything is everything, right? And even if I take my magical little, got 12 radios in it phone, because that's really all a phone is the updated version of radio, of ham radio and CB radio, is this, believe it or not. And a lot of the things that we figured out as ham and CB guys help support this back structure. Now, the data, no, not so much. But the way the information gets from A to B is still radio. It's radio. It's radio. It's radio. With the advances of the phone, he goes, the greatest invention we ever had is when Ma Bell finally let us have caller ID. And I said, yeah, what do you mean? He goes, well, at that time, when caller ID came out, he goes, I quit answering every phone. Every time the phone would ring up until then, you had the chance right then and there to either answer the phone or never know who called you. With caller ID, used to be a big box about yay big with big old soft pushy squishy buttons on the top, and you could and go back and see who called you, and it'd have a time and a date. Well, his productivity went way up. Way up. He said, I was able to get more done in my day. He goes, I'd answer phone calls in the morning that came in overnight. He goes, and I'd leave the phone alone. I'd turn the ringer off. I'd come back to it about noon, maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd answer all the phone calls that came in during the morning at about noon, 1 o'clock. He goes, and then before I left out of here at night, I'd take about another hour or so. I'd sit down and I'd answer all the phone calls. He goes, I will limit myself to about 10 minutes per phone call at a maximum. He goes, if you can't figure out what we need to do with the birth of the web page, and this is strictly his business model now. I've adopted parts of it. But if you can't figure out what you need to get done in in under 10 minutes with me, don't call. I was like, that's freaking brilliant. So for years now, with the progression of all the different phones, we have been able to enjoy the fact that we don't need to answer every single phone call. So me personally, I don't return phone calls that come in the middle of the night. The way I look at it is if you feel the need that you need to call me at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't really want to have you as a customer. I'm okay. You can call me back during normal business hours. I'm not going to respond to those things. And usually like Sunday, you're not going to get me to respond to a phone call. And really it's not the phone that's overwhelming me, it's yourself that you overwhelm yourself when it comes to phone calls. You get to manage the phone calls, right? I get to manage how long I'm on this thing, how much time I spend interacting with it, and how long I'm talking on it. This is an LG V60 ThinQ dual screen. This is not the Fold. It's a much smaller phone with a smaller processor in it. And yet this is a cheaper phone that is older and does more. Just saying, there's some cool technology out there. You just have to open your eyes up and not be an Apple person. Anyhow, I'm not going to pick on Apple, just not. I'll answer phones in the morning. I'll answer phones in the afternoon, like it's about that time now. It's about 1:30 in the afternoon. Usually what I'll do is I'll go over and I'll get packages every day. And in that package run, I'll take about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and I'll spend my time on the phone then, and then I do it again in the evening. And I do my damnedest to return every single phone call that I receive every day. Sometimes electronic shit happens and maybe, oops, I miss one. If you don't hear back from me, call me back the next day. But that's why I'm so hard to get a hold of on the phone. Not really hard, it just has to be patient. And the reason I have to do that is because there's only one of me to do everything. So that's why. The next biggest question I get asked a lot is, why do you take so long to do a repair? I don't think that I take very long to do repairs at all. What I do think takes an awful lot of time is, why does it take so long for me to get to your repair? Well, we've had a couple things happen, and we've changed our business model to accommodate this, so that that wait time is going to go way down. In the beginning, when I first started, I would take any and everything that was sent over here. Well, that didn't last too long, because pretty quickly I ran out of space and my ability to be able to store other people's stuff that was sitting here for months at a time. You gotta remember, when something comes in here, I gotta create an environment to where it's safe, 1, secure, 2, 3, no more damage has occurred to it while it's in my possession than what it came in here as, right? So storage is a huge thing. Well, I quickly, within just a year or so of being in business, I got to the point where I had so much work that I couldn't take anything more on, so I started shutting the doors. Well, at that point, I was already a year and a half behind. I'd said yes to so much stuff, I was like a year and a half behind. So now, starting from that day going forward, I don't get to do anything else or take on anybody else's equipment until I get dealt with what I have here already. And that took a year and a half. Well, then I went out and I said, okay, I'm ready to take on work again. So go ahead and send in your work. Well, what everybody did, instead of calling me first, they just started sending me equipment. And it just started coming. And I remember I had one day where like 50 packages showed up in one day. And I was, oh, shit. So very quickly, I'm out on the internet going, stop, 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 stop. Please stop. It got so full over here that it was like standing room only, right? So I also understand that not every single one of you watches every single video I do. So let's say I do a video where I'm out there begging you to please stop sending in your equipment. People miss that. It happens. So amplifiers kept trickling in and projects kept coming in and kept coming in and kept coming in and kept coming in. Well, it got to the point where I couldn't even move out here anymore. And so I had to figure out how to start returning some of this stuff. And when I started talking about how I was returning equipment and to stop, I had to do that over multiple different videos. Finally, it stopped. And I quit taking work, and I told everybody I wasn't going to take work. That mistake of saying, okay, I'm ready to take on new work again, and not have an organized system to it led to a cacophony of freaking problems. The logistics and storing it, the time away from the workbench to get it here, get it processed in the system. Being able to keep all the tags. Like, I had some stuff that had been sitting here for so long that the piece of paper they had taped to the top of their piece of equipment fell off and fell on the floor. So then I had to do this kind of whole Rube Goldberg kind of thing, trying to figure out who owned what and where it went and how many jelly beans and if they were even still alive. And if they weren't alive, how do I get a hold of the family and then get the equipment returned? Or does the family even want the equipment back? Or do they want me to do the repair and then sell the equipment and then give them the money? And who's in charge of the estate? And who does that money actually go to? I'm not kidding. These are all things that I've had to deal with. Well, that whole process took 2.5 years to get all that equipment finished and up out of here to where I could go in and out both sides of the shop and get to my lathe and my mill and my drill press and my sander and my welders and all my other tools that I have. Say I wanted to use my drill press. Well, I better take 3 hours and go move all that equipment that's stacked on, near, or around the drill press so nothing gets on anybody else's equipment. Create a spot for it, move it, and then be actually able to go do the work. So I hear that all the time. I would send you my amp, but man, it takes you forever to get to anything. Well, everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame. They want to be on their video. They want to have their little video showing what they got done on their box. And there's quite a few of them now where they're like, no, I don't care about the YouTube video. Just fix my piece of equipment and send it back. Well, everything that leaves here gets a video taken of it. Once again, we go back to the old accountability thing. Right? Here, man, here's your amp. This is what I did. This is what I fixed. This is what it does. This is how much drive it's got. This is what it takes to get it to go. Have a nice day. No intro, no extra, no fading in between segments, none of that stuff. But everybody gets a video. That way, everybody has a reference. Everybody's on the same page. All of that takes time. So this last year in September when I took on work, I took on 87 projects. And that's all I'm going to try and take on for next year. If I get to the end of those 87 projects, guess what? I'll take on more work and we'll start over. Like I said, limited amount of space. I have a feeling I'm going to get through that work relatively quickly. That's why I'm talking to people about maybe calling me in March or April and maybe taking on 1 or 2 more projects then for the end of the year to carry me into the end of the year. So we'll see. We'll just see how it goes. All right. So question number 6. Who helps me? I am it. I am the single iron. I am the mouse clicker. I am the phone answerer. I am, I got people for taxes. I got accountants. I got a lawyer. I got all that kind of stuff that every normal business has got. But I'm a one-man band for the most part. My wonderful, beautiful wife is kind enough to still extend the courtesy to deal with the t-shirt and swag orders. Like if you want a custom jacket like this, you'd shoot her a text at, let's see, what is it? boxbuildershirts@gmail.com. And who you're dealing with is my wonderful wife. She has gotten to deal with some incredibly crazy people over the last 10 years. There has Every situation you can think of has come up in the last 10 years. And the fact that she's still willing to be patient and be kind and tender with every single one of you guys that decides to contact for swag or whatever, literally on any level, is mind-blowing to me. She's into radio too. So she's the one that does the hats, which are on back order at the moment, shirts, which we have a ton of at the moment, the custom jackets and the hoodies, which we do on a custom basis. She's the one that handles all that. Everything else is me. So the more time it takes away from here, the less gets done. But in the same breath, I'm one of them people that's some kind of a control freak as far as out here is concerned and this is concerned. So I love the fact that she's willing to help, and she is an employee per se, but then again, how do you be an employee at something that you own part of? So yeah, that's the answer. Well, who helps you? No one. It's a mom and pop show over here, and I love it. I think it's great. And I get this all the time. Man, you need to hire some help. Okay. Well, quickly, let's have this conversation. Let's talk about that and help. Small space, and we're going to be really close to each other all day long. I've hired 3 or 4 people, and I've wanted to hire a couple more, but usually personal hygiene thing usually gets in the way for me. I hired one guy that I swear to God something crawled in his mouth and died. It was unbelievable. I couldn't, every time he'd exhale, I thought I was going to die. Had another guy that didn't know what deodorant was. Smart dude. He just wouldn't bathe on a regular basis, and it's not my place to teach or tell anybody those things. So that didn't work, but I'd love to find help. I'd love to do some things, but I can't in the same breath. Man, to try and find somebody that knows how to use a voltmeter and use a soldering iron today, good Lord. I mean, good Lord. I might as well be asking for somebody to go and build the space shuttle to go land on the moon. The next question I get the most, and I think it's question number 5, is why do I take on so little work? Well, I think I just kind of covered that a little bit in another segment. This is all of my projects for 2023. All of this, plus the shelving units behind it, and then this is only about a half of it. These are all my projects. And when I'm done at the end of 2023, all of this will be gone. And it goes floor almost all the way up to the ceiling. All of this will be gone. All of this. And it'll be replaced with more new projects. But the reason I don't take on more work is because the more work I take on, there's only one person to do the work. So therefore, guess what? It means longer wait time on repairs, and I want to get that wait time down. I want to get it to where somebody sends me their piece of equipment and they know within 6 or 8 months or so they're going to get it back. That's the goal, right? That's the goal. Okay, question number 4. I get this question, and it's a sub-series of questions that I get. I get this almost on a daily basis. And what causes this question is this radio. Not this particular radio, but this style of radio. The Striker radios, okay? And specifically this SWR bridge here. That SWR bridge has caused more confusion and problems than you guys will ever understand. I was flirting with the idea of making this question number 1, like the most asked question. I have demonstrated in probably no less than about 400 plus videos this SWR's bridge in comparison with a piece of test equipment meter and reflect that this bridge isn't the most accurate thing in the world. This bit here. Okay, key to radio. That bridge right there is a very good safety tool for the radio when you're running the radio by itself. All right. I had one gentleman here that bought 2 amplifiers from me, and this is not too long ago. He was trying to outthink himself and thought himself right into a hole. All right. Now, what we're going to talk about is multiple different things. The hardest problem that I have is trying to get people to be able to answer my simple question. When they call me up and they say, BBI, I'm having a problem with my SWR. It takes us probably 5 to 6 minutes of the phone call to determine, and this is okay, because if people don't know, they got to learn, right? So in no way am I making fun of anybody or putting anybody down, because that's not is, nor has it ever been my modus operandi of anything. I don't like to work like that. I'm here to teach and help, not to make fun of and belittle. I hate people that make fun of and belittle. I can't. Anyhow, the phone call comes. BBI. Yeah, so I got a couple questions. Okay, go ahead. When I turn on my amp, my SWR goes way up. Okay. Now let's pause out of the conversation and let's break that down. So what this person tells me is that when they turn their amp on, they say to me that their SWR goes up. Well, now I have to ask my question to myself, what do they mean their SWR goes up? And then I get to talking to them, and usually come to find out what they're talking about is when their amplifier is off, this SWR bridge is incredibly low. Incredibly low. It says, oh, everything's great, like right now. I key this mic. Hello, 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. There is no SWR on the bridge. The RF comes out of the back of the radio, goes through this 5-watt slug in reverse. So now we're reading the energy that comes back to the radio, which is telling us with a measurable number what our SWR is. Hello, 1 2 1 2. No SWR. No SWR, right? So we're talking 125 watts, 120 watt radio. Then it goes down through the coaxes over here on the corner of the room, goes down, tickles around, comes around, and it comes out onto the workbench. Goes into the amplifier, goes through the relay, and goes out to the antenna. In theory, in this situation, we're working into a dummy load. I have to do that for legal reasons, y'all. Okay? I cannot go and run most of this equipment balls out onto the radio on video. I can't go and transmit this equipment. That would be illegal and wrong. But if I test it onto a sealed, grounded, bonded, dummy load system, and I'm not intentionally trying to pollute the airwaves with excess RF, okay, that's okay. So primarily most of my work is done over here on a dummy load. Not saying that stuff never gets tested on the air, because in theory it would have to. I'm just saying I'm not showing that on video for reasons, okay? Now I have to determine, let's get back to the phone call. Now I have to quickly determine, without insulting this guy or making this guy feel dumb, what is he actually metering? What do you mean by it, BBI? You would be surprised. You all would be very much shocked that when I say, well, do you have an external watt meter? The answer 99% of the time is no. And I say, okay, so when you say SWR to me, are you talking your standing wave ratio going from your antenna to the amplifier, or from the radio to the amplifier? And this is where a lot of guys get really confused. They're like, what? No, I'm talking about the SWR bridge on the front of the radio. Oh, and that's when the light comes on. But first you have to determine if they're talking about, they have a watt meter that's set between their amp and their antenna, and they turn their amp on and their output SWR goes up, or they turn their amplifier on and their input SWR goes up. So then you have to go and think about all the different things that they might have tried or done. So then you got to listen to them. Well, okay, so what have you tried? Well, I've adjusted my antenna and I cannot get my SWR to come down on my radio. Okay, wait a minute. So with the amplifier off, you've adjusted your antenna and can't get your SWR to come down. Well, no, with the amplifier off, I can get the SWR perfectly flat. Okay, so once again, where are you measuring your standing wave ratio from? Do you have it from an external watt meter? No, I have the bridge on the radio. Okay, so you adjust your SWR with the radio until you get a flat SWR. Yes. Okay. Well, then what happens? Well, I turn on my amplifier and then my SWR goes up. And so the light clicks into my brain. Okay. So what they've told us is that they've only got one unit of measure. It's the bridge on the front of the radio, which, going back to the beginning of time, when they started putting SWR bridges inside of radios, we didn't trust them very much, and we never have, and I still wouldn't to this day. It is a good general reference point. But the only way to really check your SWR to your antenna is post-amplifier, and you put a watt meter at the back of your amp, by the way, just so you know. What they're having a hard time getting their brains wrapped around is what the front of the radio is showing them is the SWR from the radio to the input of the amp. And how I normally explain this is I'll say, listen, you understand that as soon as that amplifier is on, the only thing that the radio can see is the input to the amp. No, I didn't know that. Yes. I get this same question about their SWRs all the time, like all the time, okay? The reason that I show what the input reflect is with every single box that I work on and repair is to help people understand that if they put the right length of coax between the radio, or in this situation we're using the radio and the watt meter in tandem. The 1 foot jumper that goes from the radio to the watt meter is short enough that it shows very little difference in inductance and capacitance coupling with coax. So these two meters are going to read really close to the same. The problem is this meter here, if I have a quarter or a half a watt of reflect coming back on the bird meter, this meter is showing me that I got an SWR 1.5, right? If this is up like a quarter or 1 watt. So the 125 watts going out, you got 1 watt coming back, that math don't track for the SWR bridge on the front of the radio. But I understand that I live in a world where 99% of my guys are going to have a striker, so therefore I have to adjust the equipment to have a resonant length of coax that is going to be the least reactive. What I mean by resonant is it's got all the reactivity usually rang out of the coax. I've done a whole YouTube video on this. What we mean by reactance is the length of the coax is not adding any capacitance or inductance over the frequency length of the coax, which is a complicated thing. Go look at the YouTube video. I'm not getting into that today. For this, how this works out is it's about 18¼ feet for this RG316DS, okay? For the output side, that usually works out to be about 6¼ feet from the output side. I show all of this in every single video for one reason, that if you set your system up with roughly these lengths of coax or a non-reactive length piece of coax between your radio and the amp, in theory, there's always an exception to the rule. In theory, you should be able to take this piece of equipment, put it into your system, either it be in the mobile or in the base or whatever, and it doesn't have to be this long. That's as long as I need it to be to get out here to where I can work on it on video. Okay. To have a non-reactive piece of coax. I could do a 6 foot, I could do like a 1¼ foot jumper. It just has to be zero reactance in the coax between the radio and the amp. So what we'll quickly determine at that time is that usually what they've got is they'll have themselves like a Palomar 200, and they're trying to run a striker into it. Well, the input circuit on a Palomar 200, 250, 400 boomer, all of those is horrible. They've always been bad. But until recently, we didn't have a semi-reliable gauge that was right there in front of your face every single time you talk saying, hey, a little bit high SWR. Okay. Usually you can tune most of that input SWR issues out with the length of your coax is what I'm getting at. But trying to get people to understand that as soon as you key your amplifier or activate your amplifier, this meter here is only showing you the coax run between the radio and the amp and the input signal for the amp. And like I said, I had one guy that, man, he just thought he goes, I got on the internet and I looked this and this up and the math worked out for my type of coax with the velocity that I had, that the coax length needed to be 7 1/8 foot. And he goes, it's measured down to like the 16th of an inch. I'm like, what? Well, what kind of coax do you got? RG218. Or, pardon me, RG213. Oh. Wait a minute. What length of coax did you say you had? We went round and round and round about this. So finally what he ended up doing is he got on his phone, he went out and he found the web page that he was using to base his math off of. And when we got to look at the web page was figuring out coax lengths for non-resonant wavelength antennas. And he got himself confused. So when we got him back on the right track, all his equipment started to fall in line. But the problems that we had from that was him continuously running the equipment and him getting mad at the amplifier. Like he admitted to me that he might have run the thing in sideband and forgot to flip the sideband switch on. And he kept burning his relay contacts off because he didn't realize that that was part of the problem. And his receive would go away when he would unkey because now he's burned the contacts off his relays on sideband. And he started beating the amplifier because he figured out if he beat the thing enough, eventually the relays would reset. It's all these things you got to overcome all the time. But I'm telling you, that's one of the major questions is why does my SWR go up when I turn my amplifier on? It's either coax length or there's something physically has gone wrong on the inside of the amp. But 99.99999% of the time, your coax length isn't right, or this stupid thing is telling you if you have a dead key of 1 watt, how do you have an SWR of 3? I've seen that happen. If you have 1 watt going out and nothing coming back as reflect, but yet this bridge is showing you that you have an SWR of 3, do you really think that you have an SWR of 3? No. It's that there's something wrong with the bridge in the radio. Oh, but when I turn the amplifier off, I got a flat SWR. Usually comes down to coax length once again. Think about it. It'll start to add up. Okay, on to the next question. Well, we're almost to the end of this, guys. I get calls all the time. All the time. Man, you said that wrong. Did I? And then I say the same thing every time. Okay, well, what did I say wrong? And I'm not saying that to be sarcastic. I'm saying that to be serious. Listen, I was explaining this. I was on a net where these guys were watching another ham radio channel, and they were talking about the crazy world of CB. Crazy world of CB is really a fact. It is a crazy world CB. And they were asking me all these different questions about, is this true? Is that true? And I'm like, yeah. And one of the things that I mentioned was that nothing that a classically trained, there's a lot of slang that's in radio, either it be in the amateur community or it be in the CB community. A large portion of a lot of the things that we use have different terms. And they wanted to know what was a pill. Well, this is the reason that transistors are called pills. It's because the lids are white and they are round and they look like aspirin. Now on the front of this RF engineering hand guide here, you'll see there's 3 different kinds of transistors on the front of this book. Okay, and then over here, and then way off here in the corner in the future to come is LD-MOS. But if you look here, this is a 1446, 455, that kind of style of transistor back in the day. Very small, looked just like aspirins. So that's why the term pill came along, right? You all know this, everybody knows this. But that terminology, when I use it in a video, usually there's a classic trained engineer out there that drives them crazy. It's like calling these meter elements, these measuring elements, slugs. The guys at Bird and coaxial dynamics, they don't call them slugs. They're metering elements. But everybody I've ever known calls them a slug. Okay, I get that a lot. Some of it that comes from me using different terminology that guys don't really quite understand what it means. The other thing is I'm not a classically trained electrical engineer, electronics engineer, none of that shit. I'm not, never have been, never claim to be, never will. Because I'd be claiming a false. I'm not an engineer. I've read a lot of books. I've experienced a lot of stuff. I've had a lot of teachers. I learned how to read schematics all by myself, never went to school for it. Right? I learn a lot of things because I'm self-taught. And if I say something wrong or is not technically electrically correct, do not hesitate to call me and talk to me about it. I love to learn. I've learned some amazing stuff from people that have caught me where I've said something wrong, and they call me and say, hey, young man, because I'm not going to lie. Like I said in an earlier piece of segment, YouTube has told me that my demographic, y'all are older than me, all right? It just is what it is. And I'm fine with that. I love it. I love it. Hey, young man, you just said this on video and this is wrong. And you will never get the response of, man, screw you, you don't know what you're talking about, and I hang up on you. You're going to get the, oh yeah? Teach me more. Now, what you're doing is you got to understand you're opening yourself up for debate. Okay. I love to learn, and I've learned so much cool shit from people that have called me from the YouTube channel that are helping educate me to make me better. I love that. And if you're calling from that point of view, you're going to get the world's warmest reception. And you're going to get added to my list of people I might call in the future. Hey, I ran into a problem. Can you help me out? Maybe you've dealt with this and I haven't, and you know the answer to it, which is great. Okay. But then you have the other side of the spectrum. We live in a world today where people print all kinds of gobbledygook on paper, like data sheets. And the data sheets don't hold a frickin' candle anymore because everything's made in China. And the standard of measure and means that everything is held against today doesn't count. It's a good starting point. It's a decent reference. Let's look at the HG 2879 16D08. You go look at the data sheet for that son of a bitch, and it is literally a carbon copy, clip paste. Let's delete Toshiba off the data sheet and put HG 2879 on there. But it's HG 2879, but they don't tell you which rev because it comes from China. And the guy that's making the transistors isn't a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has to atone to different levels of standard. And that's the problem, is a lot of the things that we consume today in the electronics market, they're just not measured in standard. Like I just did a whole series of run amplifiers that I built, and I've had over half of them come back because the transmit receive relay that's inside the amplifier didn't have the right coating on the contacts in the relay, and after about 2 or 3 months of use, they would weld themselves either shut or open, or there'd be so much carbon buildup on the contacts that the amp wouldn't work right. Once again, is that my fault? No. It's called the person that bought the relays that sold them to me didn't fact check that they were actually built to the standards that they were supposed to be. So needless to say, I ended up replacing all the relays free of charge because that's just the way it is. Just the way it is. I found these beautiful relays that come out of Japan that actually work and last. You know, this is part of the business. It all leads back to the same thing. I had a guy call me the other day, and he was beside himself. He was going to mentally lose it because I said someplace that LMR 600 is garbage compared to RG 218. And he goes, "How could that be? You're so wrong." I said, "But am I?" And this is opening yourself up for the debate. Over here, we'll say is the LMR 600 camp. And over here, we'll say is the RG 217 camp. Over here, LMR 600. LMR 600 costs about 2/3 what RG 217 costs. I'm just giving you guys an example. You get datasheet A, datasheet B. Okay? On paper, the LMR 600, on paper, has a lower loss over a 100-foot run. Not debating that. And in theory, on paper, it can handle the equivalent amount of power as the 217. It can't. On paper, it can. And it's cheaper. Now, most of the radio community, when they go to buy coax, they want to buy the cheapest thing that they can do to get the job done. I understand that. I accept that. I, on the other hand, don't live in that world. Now, I used to live in that world. I lived in that world most of my life. But now my job is to try and show and demonstrate to you all the best way that I have found to get things done that don't break. So that's why you don't see LMR anything on my workbench. The reason that LMR is cheap is because it's not made here. Or if it is made here, you got to take into account the stuff that makes the coax. 217, solid copper interconductor. And I mean solid, not like LMR 600 where it's aluminum with a copper jacket on it, which there's a lot of that floating around in the market. Remember, there's like 25 different versions of LMR 600. And about 4 or 5 different manufacturers of it, 3 or 4 different manufacturers of it. RG 217, one company, one standard. And it harks from a different era. Remember the past when we used to have accountability and responsibility and those kind of things? Okay. This has got a foam dielectric in it. So that means if it gets hot, it gets pinched, it has too tight of a bend radius. And let's say you put your coax up in the winter, you got a tight bend radius. And then in the summer, the coax gets hot and gets soft and the foam pinches, and then you end up having a change in your impedance, which is a little bit higher of resistance. And then all of a sudden you have a burn through on your coax. That's because this coax is crap. It's got a foam dielectric in it. It's made with not the same quality control of components for the most part. RG 217, solid copper center conductor, very, very hard, good plastic based neoprene solid center dielectric, which is the insulator, and dual copper braided jacket, which means you can solder to it. Okay? Fairly low loss. And when guys come to me and they start having the debate about signal loss, they act like it's a big freaking deal. We're talking over 100-foot run. When they start talking about dBs down, we're only talking a couple hundred microvolts at the most. So it doesn't hurt you on the transmit side. It might limit you a little bit on the receive side, like a pubic hair's difference. And we're talking about 2 pieces of coax that should, in theory, handle 10,000 watts bird. This will melt, this won't. Okay? This over here, on the other hand, has got an aluminum foil shield, and it's got itself a stranded shield, but there's only like 10 wires to that stranded shield. And on top of that, they're nickel-plated aluminum. So when you go to fold the shield wires over, you can't solder to them for the most part, and they break. So you can't put soldered ends usually on an LMR, anything. You got to do a crimp. And if you do soldered ends, you got to pray to God that inside that PL259, that you're not melting that foam dielectric, and causing yourself a problem that you might not have now, but you're going to get it down the road. I'm just saying, on paper, LMR 600 is the shit, but over here in reality, RG 217 is the shit, is the way we use it, the way us radio operators use it. So, if I say something wrong, don't get too excited. Call and talk to me about it. I'd love to have those conversations. I have them every day. I get this next question so often it hurts. What kind of soldering iron is it that you use? I use a Weller 100 watt. Literally got one on my arm. To scale, okay. I use a Weller 100 watt soldering iron. This one is specifically for doing stained glass, and the reason I like using the stained glass version versus the stock 100 watt version, which is cheaper than this, by the way, it's got an orange handle. If you go to Amazon and type in Weller 100 watt, you're going to get a soldering iron that's got an orange handle on it like that. I don't like using those. The reason for that is the orange handles have a tendency to melt and they'll separate and fall apart. They're not the greatest iron in the world. They're cheap. This, though, on the other hand, harder plastic, different insulation material, and it's got a foam grip to it. I love using that. Weller 100 watt. This is also a Weller 100 watt, but this has got what they call a flat blade screwdriver tip to it. Then the Weller soldering station, I got every tip for it. My Edson, which I've had since I was probably 15 or 16. I think my dad bought me my first one of these. And then some kind of hot air soldering iron station. I don't use this a whole awful lot, but it's a tool that I've got to have for the business that I'm in. I've got every size soldering iron they make, from one that's about the thickness of a human hair to one that goes all the way up and it looks like a bull's or a whale penis. I mean, it's huge. It's freaking huge. Yeah, I've got every one in between. Big Bertha and all of those in between. Having the right size soldering iron will save you so much time, work, and energy when I'm working with some of this big electronic stuff. Through board, especially transistor style amplifiers, and the old 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and early 90s electronics, it helps to be able to get the heat on the board quickly to do a good solder job. You can use a small soldering iron with a big tip on it and crank that thing to the max, but you're going to be waiting an awful long time. Meanwhile, that's heat that's leaking into the component, destroying the component, and screwing up the trace. You want to get shit just as hot as you can and get the part out of there and limit the amount of time that heat's exposed to the component. The next most powerful tool that I have in this shop is my FLIR. I was talking with a guy just here this last Friday, and he went out and he bought himself a FLIR, and he's like, damn, dude, you are so correct. This tool, being able to see what components are getting hot when and in what form of operation, and being able to see things as far as the infrared portion of life goes, is game changing. And don't buy a cheap one, because you'll find that cheap and this technology do not go hand in hand. If you get on the internet and buy the cheapest FLIR that you can find and then go, man, I bought one of these and I can't see shit, it's crap, this is crap. Right, it's because you spent $300 on a $700 or $800 tool. I will spend all day long and 3 times on Sunday a piece of equipment. I don't care, I'll spend $2,000 on something that, if you think about it, saves you thousands of hours by the end of the year. The ability to be able to see what's heating up when and why and when it's in operation and see it clearly saves you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. So yeah, this might be $1,000 or whatever it was. I don't even know what these go for anymore. I'm pretty sure this version is like stupid cheap now, like $500-600. Spend that kind of money, pays for itself within a month, because now your productivity level goes way up. And especially if you're in the business of showing people what's happened with their equipment, the ability to go, oh look, this part right here is broken and this is why. Watch, click, run it, part gets hot, change out part, all of a sudden everything goes back to life. I'm telling you, just telling you. All right, last question. Okay, guys, last question. All right. First off, I want to say thank you to my Patreons at the end of the year. Merry Christmas to all of you guys, by the way. And thank you for coming and joining us. If it wasn't for you, I most likely wouldn't be here. YouTube does not pay worth a damn. They don't. That's why it's so important that if you watch this, you subscribe. It helps with the algorithm. And we got to feed the algorithm because YouTube sees my YouTube videos as being boring and lame and uneducational, and they don't promote them. They just don't. It's kind of how people put it is, oh, they've been shadow banned. They shadow banned me. No, it's that your content isn't what most people want to watch, is what the problem is. The reason you're not going viral is because nothing blows up in your video. No one's getting hurt in your video. It's not extreme. It's not over the top. That's the reason that you don't have 1 million subs. It's the reason I don't have 1 million subs. And I'm fine with not having 1 million subs. Honestly, I'm not interested in becoming a YouTube star. I'm not. Never was from the beginning, and still am not today. But still, these YouTube videos represent time, they represent energy, and they represent a lot of things. So thank you to the Patreons for helping support the channel, because they've either learned something from me or get some direct access, or they're looking to buy a piece of equipment or something, and they get early access to all the YouTube videos, plus there's a whole bunch behind the scenes content that does not make it to Facebook and does not make it to any other social platform other than Patreon. Okay? So thank you and Merry Christmas to my Patreon guys. A big thanks to all of you guys. Honestly. You all that tune in consistently to watch whatever I'm jabbering on about. I say thanks. I was at a little ham radio Christmas party thing the other day. And the only reason I went is because there's a young man that's part of that group that I've got a lot of faith in. He, incredibly intelligent individual. He'll probably end up being like an Elon Musk. You know what I mean? Smart kid. And he didn't have the ability to measure RF. So I had the opportunity to buy a whole bunch of bird watt meters a few years back, and I still got most of them sitting on the shelf. I was going to do a limited run of BBI bird watt meters, and it's just... Anyhow, so I went to this thing. And the guy that was holding this... the guy that was holding the Christmas party, the little club, which this club is awesome. I want to see them grow and be successful. Anyhow, he comes up to me and goes, and so we have in our presence today a guy that's on YouTube all the time, and we think he's a giant bag of wind. So to help him gauge the amount of wind that comes out of his mouth, we want to give him an air pressure gauge. I thought it was great. I appreciate every single one of you guys is the point. Mind this, and I say thank you to everybody that stops in and watches. It's flattering, and it's also overwhelming in the same breath. It is. Okay, the last question that I get asked the most, and I mean I get this all the time, is your shop open to the public? No, it is not. If you send me something, I prefer to have it show up here via the mail. Okay. My address is on my webpage. It's all over the place. All over the place. Where you need to send your stuff to get it repaired. Call before you send it. No, I'm not taking on any new work right now. Please don't send me anything because I'm not taking on new work right now. But no, my space that I work in is not open to the public. And it's not that I'm ashamed of the space that I work in. It's not that. I get this all the time. It's that I'm responsible for the equipment that is here and until it leaves here. I had one situation when I first started where a guy came over to visit, and as I was working on his equipment, I hear this crunch, crunch, crunch noise. And I'm like, what is that? And I look around the corner, and what he'd done is he'd taken all these people's pieces of equipment off the shelf, and he'd set them down on the floor and was looking at something behind something else. And what he was stepping on was a box full of sweep tubes. And he broke like a dozen 8950 sweep tubes. So the the $100+ a piece sweep tubes that had made it here safely through the postal system, which is a miracle in today's day and age, got damaged because this guy decided to move stuff around and look at it. Well, what do I get from him is I get a, oh, I'm sorry. And I'm looking at him going, dude, I had to go buy a dozen 8950 sweep tubes to make it right with the customer. So no, from that point on, I very, very much control who comes here and comes over and hangs out, because you never know what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, I'm the one that's stuck with it. Like if I drop the box and break all the tubes, that's on me. But if somebody else drops a box and breaks tubes or damages a meter that you can't get anymore or puts a scratch on something, it's still on me. So no, my shop's not open to the public. But gentlemen, I think I've taken enough of your time in this holiday season. I want to say thanks for stopping in and following along. This workspace is going to get full of some really cool projects. I'm currently working on the end of your video right now. I got a couple more small things coming up for sale. Somebody's going to have themselves a good Christmas going forward. And at least two guys are that I know of. I'm going to start working on one of those videos as soon as I end this video. And thanks. Gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed shooting it. And we'll see you. Click, click.